This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writer Life. I think it's really important that when you're a writer, or if you want to become a writer, you kind of make space for what is actually the creativity that drives writing. And you have to look to lots and lots of different spaces for sort of that creative spark that drives you with an idea that you can expand into a story. Now, as I've often said in this podcast and a lot of the blogs that I write, I look to the real world. I look to life and what's going on around me. I talk to my friends. I talk to members of the family. I go on the internet and I read blogs and I see what's actually happening. And, one of the platforms that I've used probably more than any other is the platform X, which is now called X, which was formerly called Twitter. And it's amazing, when you start to see what's actually happening in the world around us. I often look at the most popular hashtags and just go down the list and see who's put up what and what's going on where. I like to see what live streamers are adding, actually there in the moment, filming with no real narration, just showing you the truth of what's going on, so that you get every single different side of the story. And I like to look at all these things and then sort of think about them and pull them apart and kind of get a better idea of what's what. And I'm always looking to see if there's that angle that can be exploited to create something that would be really, really interesting for a reader. I suppose in many ways this is what writers have done, since writing began. They've recorded the times of their lives, be it in a fictional sense or in a documented historical sense. So I like to examine life, and I like to ponder over many things and see kind of what avenues that leads me down. Am I going down the rabbit hole, or am I walking in a landscape I recognize and I understand? And I ask an awful lot of questions about life, the world, who we are, what we're capable of, what we can achieve, what is fantasy, what is reality. I think from just listening to all the other episodes of what is my Writer Life podcast, you can see that I kind of take an idea from the world and I ask a lot of it. And as a writer, I think you need to examine every single little detail, and you do ask yourself questions. And recently I've kind of been pondering with the idea of who are we? How do we come to terms with the idea of being who we actually are? What is the purpose really of knowing our place in the world, especially this world of modern technological insanity? A lot of people these days feel set adrift. They feel lost, disconnected from the world that they live in, to the point where there are actually a great many in this world who have become so disillusioned they've taken their own life, which is actually something that I've highlighted and documented in my Curio Chronicles series. If you think about it, how do we get to those kind of places where nothing has any value anymore and life appears utterly pointless? Is a world where we dictated to via communicated devices, given one-sided news that is bought and paid for by those who pull the strings, in the endless new forced pandemics and talks of war, actually the only future that we've got to look forward to in this new reality. And so, have we become hopeless and despondent with the day-to-day drag of our own existence? Are we at a new turning point, having our own personal and private existential crisis, lost in the pack, unable to define meaning in our lives as we feel threatened that we're being pulled to the edge of annihilation on a global scale? Because there are times when it feels like that, and there's a lot of people out there who worry about that. These are the questions I asked myself in my younger days, and yet, I find I'm still looking for an answer today. These are the reason why I write my fantasy or modern contemporary fiction stories, as I try to separate the ideas of a life and look deeper into the pool of life, staring blindly to find clues that can lead me to some sort of writing epiphany. Are we somewhat like Opal from Heirs to the Kingdom, sat alone in her empty glade, staring into her seeing waters in hope of finding some clue or fact that will give Runestone some hope so that she will be victorious in her own struggle? I passed the milestone of 60 years of age this week. Hell, where does the time go? Because, deep down inside me beats the heart of a young teen, still fascinated with life and all its twists and turns. I think it feels at times like I will forever be caught in a sort of the fight of a world driven by greed and big business, clashing with my endless struggles to find a way to survive, trying to sell books against the odds, as the majority of the revenues that are actually made from those books go to the global powerhouses, as I'm dismissed with a meagre payment that amounts to nothing, that represents the smallest percentage of the actual sale. It kind of feels like an insult at times for what has been years of creativity, thinking, writing, editing, and posting just about everywhere on the internet, simply to get seen, when inside at times I find myself feeling invisible and unheard, because those who rule, whilst happy to take the largest share of the revenue from my sales, they do not really even know that I exist. I have to ask, is that how all of us feel in this so-called world of modern technology and money, driven by a world of utter greed? Words matter to the reader, and that is actually their weakness, because that is the means in which those who have it all gain more. Money is the new god, and it's worshipped at their altars of power in an almost satanic fashion by the ultra-elite, as it amplifies their voices and grip of control of the forever dumbed-down masses who are being blindly led into a cage of their own making, and they're not really even aware of it. As I think back, I can really understand why police officers, nurses, soldiers, farmers, and the blue-collar workers and lower classes now feel there's absolutely no purpose to life, because they're being ground down in the drudgery of a life that's lost all of its meaning. Because as I wrote recently in one of my new stories that I'm creating, the truth of the matter really is, in this new modern media-driven world of manipulation, the lie has actually become the truth, and the truth is now considered to be the lie. If you take a moment and you just think about it, what the hell is misinformation? Whatever happened to being honest and telling the truth? And how have they become old-fashioned notions in a country that once was proud that it was built on the concepts of debate and free speech? because we live in a democracy. That was the foundation of the land that we live in. It appears to me that wars are no longer about weapons that fire endlessly, killing masses. Those that are happening today, they're more like a stage show, a theatre, a play. The real war is in our heads, put there by those who own the media and advertising industry. And they use terms like, well, it's for your benefit, to convince you that they're the good guys, when actually behind them, they're enacting the real machinery of war, the mechanics of a psychological operation designed to distract you from what is actually real, so that you continue on the path that we will give them all the power and lead you gently into your own oblivion. It could just be me, but it does feel at times like those with power hate and despise us, and they're hell-bent on removing us. So they create their own glorious ideal of a world that's dedicated to the praise of just them. It's Wood and Dursley on a bigger scale, with a host of Marjories, Henriettas and Bethanies leading the charge and convincing the masses that we're nothing more than the likes of the curios, utter trash to be silenced and removed from their sight for speaking up and speaking the truth in a world that's designed and conditioned to legitimize the lie. It feels very much these days like Mason Knox is at the walls and he's doing his best to wipe us away and rewrite the past, just like Rhiannon in her realm, ruling over all, showing favour to those who blindly obey, and then lashing out to destroy those who will not walk the line of her dictatorial demands. We once stood for something. We once had value in ourselves and in our land. We were considered to have a rich cultural past, but even that appears to be being attacked and eroded day to day, to the point where we've lost the identity we once held as being part of our nation. In many ways, it feels like Heirs to the Kingdom was ahead of its time. As I sat back in the 1990s and I put together a story where our survival was dependent on looking back to understand our past and then use it to forge a way forward, reconnecting our ties to the past and understanding why they were so important back then and are far more valued today. They are the key to who we are, where we came from, and what our land was founded on. I try to teach each of my children that before them is a long line of people who are the ones that brought our blood in the form of ourselves into the future, and it should have meaning. For endless generations, people have met, they've fallen in love, had children of their own, fought for the land they lived on, and defended the little that they had. It is a dream of the hooded man in Heirs to the Kingdom. Nothing too extraordinary or extreme, just a land where we can live free, provide our own families, and be at peace with each other. In the world today, it feels almost utopian. How can something so simple be so hard to achieve? We are told, you will own nothing and be happy. As we fall in line, take our shots, use little carbon, and become content in our prisons of 15-minute cities, eating mealworms and fake meat, and then give up our cars and freedom as we're tracked, chipped, and watched like a Chinese state. When I was a kid at school, we were actually taught that that was enslavement. It was oppression, totalitarian. And yet today, we're told that it's for our good and it's for our benefit. It will keep us safe and secure as long as we toe the line and do what our feudal lords, the global elite, tell us to do and how to live. Democracy and free speech appear to be dying. Mason Knox is alive and well and living out his billionaire lifestyle in Switzerland with his central banking buddies. The world has become an unfamiliar landscape. It's actually a writer's paradise. And from this landscape, writers can take large sections and build stories around them. In the last few months, I've been working behind the scenes writing a brand new story. The manuscript is actually complete, and I'm working now on a follow-up novel to it. It is, a new tale, which has a barren and hostile new world. It has different races, religions and creeds that clash, and people are challenged by mixed ideas of who they are and who they want to be. I really do find it reflects society today perfectly, where there is a push to destroy the idea of certain cultures and the value of belonging to the land that surrounds these new races of my story. I really am pleased. It reflects the many ideas we have of identity and the immorality of those who have power, who want to corrupt everything to their own will and desires. It highlights the sickening hidden truths of today's society. But it does it in a way that weaves around a narrative of belonging, almost as if it reflects the life of anyone who is living today. This is what I do. I'm a writer that shows the hidden truths of reality by creating a character and then writing their life. And I do it simply by looking back to the past and understand what is now a long forgotten societal view. And I then compare it with the changes we have seen happen in the world over the last 30 years. In many ways, age is now on my side. I'm a teller of tales. I have a rich past of looking back and understanding history, and I feel it is in which I actually find hope for the future of humanity. There are so many lessons to be learned from our past, and they still hold true today. And it's actually within that I actually find my greatest strengths as a writer. Recent times have seen certain powers trying to change the narrative. Schools most certainly are skilled at taking sound bites and presenting them out of context to fit a certain narrative that suits their masters, pulling the strings from their lofty positions. But I do feel they're doomed to fail, as I have faith in the past, I always have, as I have used it to guide and notice how history has a habit of repeating itself until the lesson is actually learned. And we are still in a position where we have got a lot of learning to do. Today in the modern world, and especially in the modern UK, we're told that we must be ashamed of our heritage because it was built on slavery. And recently a piece was published stating that all of the UK's ancestors that originally inhabited these isles were originally black, which I found to be quite strange. But there's also no country free of the tainted past of slavery. No one mentions the vast numbers of white Irish who were enslaved, or the white Christians chained to boats by their black masters and forced to row the huge boats that carried men to war or goods to market. We're told we are the great white oppressors, and yet no one mentions how pagans, who were the original people of this land, in their thousands, were slaughtered and butchered by the Christians, or even how the Romans would set pagans on fire to light their garden lawns at night. Black people have sold other black people and white people have sold other white people. I mean, no race is innocent. And yet the history books are now being rewritten to suit the needs of those who want to sow the seeds of division and hatred. The truth is now the lie, and the lie has become the new truth. And it's very convenient. And yet, as we've seen countless times, eventually, every empire falls. And I think this modern empire filled with the rich and the powerful will at some point, like every other empire, simply end. I find it really, really interesting that in the past, a long time ago, men decorated their shields with the cross of St. George, and they went to war to defend their beliefs and their country. And yet today, the red cross on a white background, once a symbol of pride of this nation, is now seen as racist. And yet the flags of those connected to their so-called right cultures, which are not even flags of this land, well, they're fine and allowed in some sort of double standard that nobody really understands. But those pulling the strings do. In World War I and II, our so-called leaders told us to gather our young and send them to their deaths in foreign land. And all done with the Union flag flying, held up by a brave man in the midst of a battle zone. It was a standard we could gather around and unite under as the symbol of our freedom and the sacred soils of the country we loved. My grandfather went to war in the First World War. He was shot in the head in France and left for dead, his Union flag flying at the camp where he had reported to. He was left for dead by his own side, bleeding to death in blood-soaked mud to defend Manchester Hill, which in truth was nothing more than a small hummock in a French farmer's field. His fate was turned around by a German, a man who he was told was his enemy and he should kill them. But the German soldier, seeing him dying, lifted him from the battlefield and carried him back to the field hospital, where his life was saved by his enemy, and he spent the rest of the war in hospital and was returned home when peace was finally brokered. I cannot deny that the story of the Good Samaritan holds great value in my life these days. I mean, it's just a fable, a story written in an age long past. And yet it actually reflects the reality of my own line of family. My grandfather came home just after the peace of 1918, and 20 years later he became a father to the man who is actually my own father. Now, without that one brave German who felt the compassion and humanity of his own soul, I would not actually be here to tell this tale, because I never would have existed, as my grandfather would have died on the battlefield. In 2018, I raised the Union flag on a flagpole in my home. It was to honour the fallen and as a tribute to my grandfather. At that time, all over my country, the Union flag flew as a mark of honour. Every house was adorned with them as a symbol of our national pride and of the freedoms that we found through those great acts of bravery of our glorious dead. We all talked of ensuring we would never have another world war. We would never again send our young to die on the muddy battlefields of distant lands. Exactly as Robbie and Rowan in Heirs to the Kingdom chose peace after their own great war, and then worked to create a land that would never again divide and kill each other. We talked the same. Today it's just 6 years since that time of raising our national flag. So what happened? Where did the understanding and the pride go? Our leaders see it, and they now call those who carry the Union flag alt-right, domestic terrorist, and racist. How quickly the tide has turned. Their talk of peace is but a long-forgotten memory, because suddenly they're now talking of bringing back conscription and sending our young to die on the battlefields of Ukraine and Russia. It appears to me the morals of our rich overlord leaders are free to change their minds when there is a handsome profit to be made, and our young once again become pawns in a rich man's game, who will be sent to their deaths. I think that is a really clear lesson that we've learned nothing, have we? In Heirs to the Kingdom, I outline how Robbie believes that battles and wars are started by those of power and money, and how their lives are too precious to throw away on a battlefield. The wheels of industry are turning once again. Machines will be working flat out to create the tools of war. And won't the owners, those rich few, do very, very well out of it all? Won't they be pleased? I mean, after all, they're not going to go to war. And won't their bank accounts bulge when all of this is over and done with? History repeats itself. The top 4% get richer and more powerful, and the rest of us suffer in this new world that is to be reset to their whims and need to feed their lustful greed. In China, Chairman Mao destroyed his land and his people to take control. He brainwashed the young to lead his communist system as he forced his own will on billions of people, many of whom died. Now, whether you see it or not, history is actually repeating itself as our youth of today are being brainwashed in a similar way with their new ideologies of sex, gender and socialism. And they will be used to force the rest of us into submission. And only then will they actually realize the freedoms that they were promised in this new utopian idealistic world was actually a lie. And it was them who helped everyone else walk into the cages of a totalitarian regime. It's absolutely no different from Mason Knox and his orphanages decide to grow and breed his faithful race of new young oppressors. In both my stories of Heirs to the Kingdom and the Curial Chronicles, it is a simple dream that drives them to victory. For Robbie and Runestone, it's that idea of a life together on a land living free. And as I write in the upcoming book Violet Stone, the following passage is where Runestone and her youngest daughter comes to her in the middle of the night with a very bad stomachache, and Runestone carries her back to bed. Rune rubbed her back and her hand began to glow with a soft violet light. She then gently lay her daughter back onto her bed and then sat at the side of it, and she smiled as she placed her hand on Gaelania's stomach and rubbed as it glowed. Gaelania settled and closed her eyes, and Rune softly stroked the hair from her face. Sleep deeply, sweet pea. Gaelania turned on her side and Rune pulled up the covers with a smile and looked round at the other two beds, where Fern slept in a tight ball, and Tegan lay sprawled out, her head hanging over the side of the bed. She quietly got up and walked to the door and turned back to watch for a moment with a soft smile on her face. Her voice was soft and almost a whisper. This was all I ever wanted, just this, Robbie and me and my beautiful children. no matter how hard or how dark it was worth the fight. She turned and walked down the long corridor. She was Runestone Sapphire, Lady of the Woods, an Eve in a human form with the power of life. And yet, none of that mattered to her, because she was also called Mum. It's such a simple dream, one that years ago many desired and achieved as they became the parents of all of us. And yet today, that is no longer acceptable. Just like Mao did, our young are taught the word mother is offensive, and we should all use the term birthing parent so that men can have babies. Young girls are taught your career is far more important, and to build that and forget the family. They're not told it's because their work generates greater profits for the elites who run everything. Just like Meghan and her family in Heirs to the Kingdom, they were sent to work in the fields to feed the massive armies that would drive Mason's need for control. He gained everything while they lost their freedom. Like modern women today, they worked hard, but they were slaves to a system designed to milk every ounce of productivity out of them. And now in today's world, there are many women who feel alone as they pass the age of 35, slowly losing their looks and youth, and broken-hearted knowing their chances of raising children are gone. How much money is worth crying into a pillow every night because you realize your dreams will never happen, and that very same dream that Runestone desired will never actually be yours? In the Curio Chronicles, Birch makes Dead a promise, and she paints a picture that will become the rest of her life. This is a new start, Deads. No isolation, no loneliness, and a life worth living. We came back to this village side by side and they hated us. Some of them still do. This is where you and I will live, and we will show them. We will show all of them that having us here is the best thing this village has ever known, and that all starts with having a house which is the envy of them all. It's also a house filled with love and friendship. I hope that now you can see why I have done all of this. Deads, just by living a good, happy life, we will prove them all wrong. It's a dream worth having. But what is the point if you believe in segregation and dividing people up? How can people understand that they have the right to live this way when globalists with hidden agendas of control tell them you will own nothing? 64 million people died in the last World War because they believed in the same dream, and Hitler threatened it. In my stories, either Mason Knox or Marjorie threatened to take away those simple dreams of free people in order to use and manipulate them for their own greed and their own benefits. And to me, it looks like it's happening again in the world today. Our history books show how, since the dawn of civilization, that we are a free people and a part of the land that we live on. It's not radical, it's not far right or even racist to want all of those who walked before us and have what they had, and they fought to defend it. This is actually our land, and we only have ourselves. And it is up to us to do something. Those who pull the strings want us lost and confused, because that is the means by which their lies burrow inside our minds and make us compliant. There are far more of us than there are of them, and it feels like we've all forgotten that. Across the world today, the farmers are highlighting our need to stand tall and take back the land we live on from those who feel they have a right to crush us for profit and power. I suppose I know this tale well, because I've written it in different forms throughout Heirs to the Kingdom, the Ark stories, and the Curial Chronicles. I do not actually think it is wrong to love the land that you live on, or even have some pride in it. And I do not think there is anything wrong with refusing to walk a line of control set by rich men in foreign lands. There was a time when loving your country was not seen as wrong. And if we head towards another world war, never forget those who are telling you that it is wrong will be the very same ones asking you to die to defend it. No matter what those people think, I still think that loving the land holds true. I live on the British Isles, and I've travelled extensively around what really is a very beautiful collection of countries. And I've added aspects of my love of them to all of the books that I've written. We need to stand tall and join together and then tell the world, this is our land, it's our home, and we can be our free selves. And if need be, like the stories that I write, then we will fight for the right to keep that thought. I sat with my wife not that long ago, and I looked at her and I told her, they call me a writer of fiction and fantasy, and yet the meaning behind my stories is actually reflecting real life. It is no wonder that everyone is confused, lost, and feeling utterly hopeless. The likes of Mason, Rhiannon, and the Dark One are all alive and well and trying to take over the world. I'm not sure why I write these days, because the fiction I write is becoming reality. She smiled at me and she told me, just keep writing. Someday people will discover them and then they will learn from them. After all, is that not the reason you write and the reason that we all read? I suppose history is filled with writers who have written about the times that they live in. And so with that in mind, even with my small readership, I'll push ahead and continue to tell my tales until I can no longer do it. I suppose at the end of the day, I've done something that matters to me, and I think that is actually really important. Thank you to everyone who has listened today. Again, I try to be thought-provoking and really make people want to run out and grab a book and learn something new about the world. It bothers me that reading is becoming unpopular. I actually believe that's one tradition we really do need to revive, especially with our younger people. The young need to read. It will broaden their horizons and it will inform them of other people's thoughts, theories, attitudes and feelings. And it's massively, massively important that we do everything we can to keep reading alive. If you've enjoyed today, I think that's brilliant. And I hope that you'll come back and listen to some more of my ponderings and witterings as I put together crazy stories, all set in fantasy situations, but based on a very, very real and at times quite scary world. There's a lot of good in the world, and I write about that too. There's a lot of love and there's a lot of beauty in the world, and I always take great joy out of writing those things down. I'll be back next week with something else which I hope will make you ponder a while. Until such time, I will say thank you for listening in, and I will see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below. And please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.